Hi, and welcome to Designed for Life, the podcast that brings design and technology teachers and business leaders from across the UK together as we collectively seek to inspire, energize, and create the workforce of the future.
Hi, and welcome back to Design for Life, the podcast brought to you by the Design and Technology Association. My name is Tony Ryan. I'm the Chief Executive of Design and Technology Association, and it's my great privilege to host this podcast. Today, we are lucky enough to have a guest on with us who we've been chasing for some time, to be honest. We had a lecture lined up, which was put together with our friends from the Edge Foundation last year and was scheduled and was actually close to sold out in London. Unfortunately, COVID put it all to a stop and we had to cancel the whole thing. And we've been trying to get together since then in order to get this podcast and get this up and running. But she's a busy lady. So today I'm delighted to have Zoe Laughlin on the podcast. Zoe is a British artist, designer, maker, materials engineer. From her Twitter profile, she describes herself as a director of stuff and a maker of things. Zoe is a co-founder and director of the Institute of Making, which we will no doubt touch on within the podcast. The Institute sounds like an amazing place, describing itself as a multidisciplinary research club based at UCL in London. Zoe is possibly best known to design and technology teachers and students for her work on BBC's Big Life Fix, but also last April, which seemed to have slipped by a lot of people, where it was a great episode, 3 episodes actually, of How to Make on BBC 4. So without further introduction, over to Designed for Life in conversation with Zoe Laughlin. Here today with Zoe Laughlin, and Zoe, thank you so much for taking the time to do this amongst what I know is a busy schedule for you.
You're very welcome. Always a pleasure to talk making. And
we will. I've got stacks of questions here, and as I say, we'll work out where the conversation takes us. Can I ask, by way of a start, because you're trickier than most guests. Most guests you can box. I can't box you. You're all over the place.
That's music to my ears.
So just tell us a little bit, if you could, about your background and what's brought you to where you are now.
I love a project, I think. I love that sense of like a coup. There's an amazing book by Philippe Petit, who's the guy who strung a rope between the 2 World Trade Center towers and walked it as a tightrope walker. But the book, I read that when it first came out, and I was like, yeah, I get it. It's about a mission and a project and a thing that kind of consumes you, but at the end of the day it's just because you want to, and that's enough. Like, if it interests you and you're up for it, just keep going. And I love making things, and I love this sort of physically engaging with the world around me. My mum always said I'd come home with my pockets crammed full of really great stones and sticks and things I found that were somehow really brilliant, but it was just like, yeah, what's this bit of old something or other Zoe's picked up off the ground. Like, there's a kind of sense of collecting and engaging and noticing things that I've always really liked and finding out about them. And then one enthusiasm begets another. And when you're interested in something, it opens up more doors into other things. So I made some work using sugar, and I was interested in all aspects of sugar. Like, if you're interested in making a sculpture from sugar, why wouldn't you also want to know about sugar, how it's grown, and the farming of sugar, or the calorific value of sugar and the idea of what it might do to the body, or what is sugar molecularly. Like, it was that sense in which, if you're interested in it, surely you just want to know as much about all sides of something as possible, and that art, design, craft, engineering are all part and parcel for me of making things. Like, that is what comes together when you're interested in the made world and the making of things and the life of things. So it's just ways of looking at those things and coming up with interesting ways of doing stuff with them, or projects. And I think I'm quite a generalist because I quite like lots of things. So I like to be able to move from one plane into another. And for me, there's a connection, but maybe for someone else, they're like, why is she in that box? And then she's over in that box.
Yeah, I mean, you've been labelled all over the place. I mean, you know, there is arts there, and then there's the design, but you don't come from a typical design background. It swings towards science at times, and, you know, some of the stuff that that you did early on TV. I mean, I went back and looked at the Philip Scofield and, covering his shoes in stuff and blowing things up and whatever. You were in there as a scientist and as an explorer. And then there's a huge research element to what you do as well. And throughout the whole lot is this sort of wanting to break things down to the very nth level to look at the materials and look at what can be done with that material.
Yeah. There was a really important moment for me. The first time I held a rod of tin, imagine something the size of a pencil, but it's a stick of tin. So you've got a metal, which is a pure element on the periodic table. And I just bent it in my hand, thinking I wasn't going to be able to bend it. Like, this is metal rod. I wonder how stiff it is. And firstly, I was surprised that I could bend it. Then I was sort of astonished that when I did bend it, it made a sound. And also I could feel something in my hand. So what happened was it went kind of like, basically take squeaky, crackly gravel, kind of crunchy and squeaky. And what I was experiencing, both hearing it and feeling the vibrations in my hand, was the crystal structure of that metal. So zooming down inside the material, understanding that there was this crystalline structure to the metal, and that those crystals, when they move, sort of catched on each other and made a sound. And that, it was a bit cracky and crumbly, like maybe it was about splintering, like this was made of glass, yet it was ductile and malleable. So here was something that was bendy, that was making a cracking sound, that was to do with something going on right down inside it. But it was making an experience. And I think that you can suddenly change your way of thinking about what that material is like and zooming inside it because you've had an experience of it. If you read it in a book, well, you'd know it in one way and maybe you'd forget it. If someone told you about it and I'm telling you about my experience, maybe you remember it in another way. But if you actually get to hold it and actually get to bend it and actually feel the behaviours of something you cannot even see, suddenly you've got a memorable experience. And I think for me, experience and communication and engagement and encountering of stuff is what really excites me, because that's living,
And that's what our subject's about. And, we'll come to it later on, I think, but quite often teachers will say, well, actually the theory part of it is really hard to teach because the kids aren't interested in that. Well, they're not interested because it's a PowerPoint slide that's on the board and you're talking through it. Let them hold it, let them play with it the way that you... But we'll come back to that if we could. With every guest, we go right back to school. What was school like for you?
I enjoyed school. Quite early on in schooling life, I realised I wasn't very good at reading and writing, which was like the main thing of school. But at the same time, I seemed to have unwavering confidence that didn't seem to matter.
Yeah. Pass by that. Let's do other stuff.
What do you mean I've spelt that wrong? That's your problem. Carry on. I mean, there was a lot of attempts to put me in classes for spelling, and I think they found out I was dyslexic at a pretty young age, like 7 or so. And that was quite rare to be sort of identified and diagnosed sort of formally at that age. But as I said, for me, it wasn't stopping me communicating with the world and getting my point across. The best thing that would happen would be that people sort of ignored it. The minute they tried to train me up and solve the problem, I was like really annoyed by that. What I could do was put effort in. Do you know what I mean? And I think what you realise in life, I think, is that often that's the thing that makes it work in the end. It's not the talent, it's the persistence, if that makes sense.
It's amazing. We've done 12 of these interviews now, and I think a third of the people that we've interviewed have been dyslexic. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be a trait that within creatives that you can't excel in one area at a young age, so you actually concentrate maybe on another area and that becomes better.
And I don't think it stopped me trying. That's the other thing. And I sort of got there in the end. I was never top of the class, but I would occasionally really pull one out the bag and do really well at something. But it would be the teachers identified that I put effort in and I was conscientious. And I think in some ways that was a really great thing to have nurtured in myself, is that I was willing to try, because actually lots of times you'll fail at something and then it's keeping going that will make the difference. I know that, there's always someone who is really good at maths at school, but then they hit a ceiling where they don't keep trying at it. And that's just how good they were when they just decided that was good enough, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, I listened to loads and loads of podcasts, and I was listening to one yesterday, Matthew McConaughey, and he was talking about, you ceiling on stuff. And when you ceiling on stuff, you either accept that's your ceiling or you push through and you go to the next level. And he said it's the gritty people that push through and go to the next level and take themselves out of the comfort zone. So that's pretty much what you're describing, is that to hell with it, I'm going to go and I'm going to push a little bit further and see where I can go.
But also because it was difficult from the beginning. There was nothing easy about learning to read. So I didn't know that it could have been easy. Like, I've had sort of experience in adult life of coming across like 6 and 7-year-olds who'll just read me stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that's really amazing. You're reading a book? Wow. Like, I had no comprehension that was quite an easy thing to do. But I love sports at school. I love art and design. I love music. I was in bands. Like, I just threw myself into what was to be had, I suppose.
And what part of the world was that? Where was that?
It was in Sandwich in Kent. It was a grammar school. So in theory, you have the 11 plus in Kent, and you had to pass the 11 plus to go to, a grammar school. And I didn't pass. But again, it was that, like, the teacher's like, that's where she should be going, and we'll do an appeal. And my head teacher will go, just talk to her, go on. And I don't know if that would happen now.
I was a head teacher in Kent for a while, and we were one of the few non-grammars in a grammar system. And we got all the kids that didn't pass the 11 plus, who arrived at 11 feeling that life was over, that they failed. But we used that and we said, okay, all you've done is you failed an exam. Now you pick up and you go on. And they did great things. But yeah, it was an interesting system. It was a difficult thing. I don't think it would happen now, is the answer.
No, I doubt it. A number of my school friends, like dear friends, have gone into teaching. And they say to me, even now, we still sort of use you as an example to some of our students. So, like, French was unimaginably difficult. And I used to come up with these really concocted ways of just breaking down a French word into 3 syllables and then giving each syllable an English version and a meaning that was entirely different. Like, come up with this way to try and remember for the vocab test each week. If you didn't get over 6 out of 10, it was an instant detention. And I think the time I didn't get an instant detention, like, the whole class were like, hey!
So A-levels and university, how did that go?
I remember distinctly the sort of slight shockness of my parents when I came home on the first day of A-levels, and I came back from school sort of doing completely different subjects from the one I went to school to do, type thing. Like, the first day I just changed my mind. And I remember certain things didn't quite fit on the timetable together. And they're like, also, you said you want to do chemistry and art. They happen at the same time now, so you're going to have to choose. And I remember a thought being like, I'm sort of fed up of sitting on stools. So maybe I'll
So let's drop chemistry then, yeah?
Well, I won't do chemistry then. I'll go with art. Yeah, I'll go with art then. And also I remember thinking, in the art route, you can more quickly do your own thing. Within the science route, you were sort of had all this other stuff you had to learn before you could do your own thing. And I thought, well, you could probably do some science within the context of it being like art, but you definitely couldn't do some art within the science thing. So I picked the art subject because it felt more freedom, I suppose.
So art, and what else was it?
I did textiles. Again, this was a choice that I made on that very first day of A-level, thinking, actually, I'll choose that one, because I didn't do it at GCSE, but it was the one subject where I really saw it had a mixture of stuff. They were like, well, 25% is physics, basically, kind of about yarns and textiles and Young's modulus and stress and strain. And it's about the science of fabrics and yarns and a textile and weaving and stuff. And then 25% was making stuff. 25% was sort of designing as opposed to making. Well, not that I don't really see a difference, but, that's how they broke it down, like stuff on paper versus things you made. And 25% was history. And I thought, that sounds good, because there's got lots of different things within the one subject. That was the subject that really connected the dots, I think. It was the first time you had presented this idea of a banner that hung over a subject, like it's about textiles, but you realised it was about everything. Because you say, we're looking at the history of 1850 to the modern day in Britain. So it's got a lens on it, and it's in a way small, but actually things when you're 16, 17, 18, you're learning something new, and you're learning something about the connections between things. You realise, that's when the sewing machine was invented, and that's when women got a vote, and that's when this happened in the home. So it had a sort of domestic element of domestic history, which was very different from what you got in school history, which was quite large-scale national history. This was sort of small people history. and the relationship between what it means to work in a factory and not have childcare, or then a material come in and then you have cotton and prices change. And you realise that the history of that was also tied into the things that were made at that time. And then they would say, and then Mary Shelley wrote this book. And I also did English literature at A-level. The book we were studying at A-level isn't this abstract thing. It was surrounded by a culture, and that culture that surrounded the book in the moment of its writing affected the book, and that the book also affected it. And that you would look at the history of fashion in the 60s, but would also talk about music and the influences around then, and also the political influences. Nothing's sort of in isolation, I think. And I think that, as I said, it was the moment the penny dropped. Human endeavour and human culture doesn't belong to one subject.
I love that because I think one of the failings of our education system is that we box everything into, right, you're going to do an hour of English and then you're going to drop everything that you've learnt there and you're now going to go on and do this other subject. Then you'll drop everything you learn there and go on it. And actually they all mingle, don't they? They all overlap. If you can take the learning from one and bring it into another, then I think that just enhances the experience for students. What about university then? Where did that take you?
I first went to art college to do a foundation, which is the kind of standard path into kind of art and design in Britain, where from school don't go into the degree. You do this foundation art and design pathway to kind of, again, have a generalist taster of stuff and then go, oh, actually, I need to be a fine art printmaker. Or for me, I must do graphic design. I'm going to do typesetting. Or like people would find a niche, but the foundation year was that general year. But for my school to go and do a foundation, before that, they made us go through that UCAS process of applying to universities. But because I knew I wanted to go and do the foundation first, it sort of had quite a low stakes vibe for it for me. Like I didn't feel like, I just thought, well, I'll just pick some things and apply for them, blah, blah, blah. And I got into Aberystwyth University to do film and television because an English teacher and a family friend who I thought was really great and always had interesting things to say about the world and recommendations about, have you seen this? Go and watch, I said, I've heard it's good there. So I was like, oh, well, I'll apply then. And then I got in and then I thought, well, I'll defer because I don't have to make a decision then. I've just deferred. And then when you're in your foundation year, the idea is that you then apply to art colleges. And again, I thought, well, I've already got this place doing something that sounds quite good. I can't turn it down without trying that. So I did my foundation year in art and design. And then I went to Wales to do film and television. And within the first 2 weeks, again, I changed my mind. But I think not being afraid to spot something and go, aha, that's for me, and go for it, rather than analyse it too much and think, oh, I can't. I basically what happened was, this first year cohort of film and television students, they give us this common first year with also the drama students. And we're exposed to all these different lecturers. And this man came in to do this lecture and sort of began by getting very close to the microphone and sort of said, men, when left to their own devices, do this. And then played a video. And then again, women, when left to their own devices, do this, and played this video. And what he was playing were these kind of extraordinary range of performance art pieces, in a sense. This was sort of avant-garde performance from the 1960s and 70s. Marina Abramovich and her partner, a black and white film holding a bow and arrow, where she holds the wooden part, so to speak, and he holds the bow, and they both lean back against each other, and there's an arrow in it pointing at her. I think the actual film probably goes on for an hour, a durational performance piece. But I'm thinking, this is the most powerful film I've seen, and I'm here to do film. And this was a lecture by a performance studies professor called Mike Pearson, who's a very influential practitioner and theoretician in the world of performance. And then he showed a film by an artist called John Rowley. He was doing this as a choreographer, but he made the best film I'd seen in ages. We'd just been watching Taxi Driver and writing an essay about it. And then suddenly there was this film by a guy. He took the BBC sound effects tape. And, you can imagine the sound effects library will have all sorts of tapes. And there'll be one farmyard sounds and things like this. And he found a CD or tape that it was called Sound Effects for Death and Destruction. And he used that as the devising principle to make a short film, the duration of the tape. So you'd have, a 3.5 minute track about the sound of something being crushed. He made a 3.5 minute video performance about something being crushed. And it was just spectacular. and I liked the rigour, I liked the formalism, I liked the idea.
So that hooked you in?
I just got it. And I was like, yeah, this is for me. This is for me. So I instantly did performance studies, but you had to do a few of the other modules. So I still did some film and TV stuff, but it was an art college experience, but in a university that taught lots of other subjects. I remember, again, when I was doing my foundation, I remember thinking the library was kind of weird because it was only full of art books. Whereas in Aberystwyth, because it was a classic university with many different subjects, the library was full of all of their books. So as a sort of art, performance art student, you had a lot of food available to you, but you had this idea that you'd be given a provocation, come up with a project, do your thing, and there isn't really a right or wrong way about this. The best thing you can do is just do it with the best intention that you can. And, discovered artists and practitioners like Brian Eno, and people who have very diverse and interesting careers where they just decide they're interested in this and then you follow that. And I think that was my first degree. And after that, I didn't really know what else to do, but I thought I probably should go to London. And I went to Central St Martin's College of Art and Design and did my master's there. And that was very much fine art, performance, design, sculptural type of work. But you realise it's up to you to make the thing you want to make. I remember I sort of had this problem. It was like one of those idle thoughts when you're looking at space. And I was thinking, if you've got one thing, then one thing, then one thing, how many triangles could you make between all joining up these things? Anyway, it was sort of idle thought to myself. And then I started drawing it out, thinking, well, if I've got one node there, one node there, one node there, one node there, if I connect up the dots, how many triangles does that make with a node each? And I thought, well, there's got to be a formula for this, because I wanted to solve this for a kind of spatial design project I was doing, and I couldn't find the answer. And then I was like, well, that means I've got to solve it. I can solve this. And I started speaking to mathematicians and got various people to help me. But the response from some of the art tutors was like, Zoe, you're at art college, it's about the questions, not the answers. I'm like, bloody hell, you don't get it. Like, you totally can solve this problem. Therefore, I am going to solve it. Like, this is...
I'm not dropping it. I'm in now.
Yeah, this is the coup. This is the tightrope. This is the thing now that I'm doing, and I'm going to complete. And that's important. It's not about the question. It is totally about the answer. But that took me sort of into this world of science conferences and presenting what I had found out to people who that was their day-to-day language, but I was coming at it from a different point of view. And then I sort of went back to performance conferences and told them about my work in maths. And they're like, oh, it's so interesting that a mathematician speaking at... I thought, well, I'm not a mathematician. I mean, this is like the limit of my maths. I'm not a mathematician. But you realise you're telling stories about adventures in different worlds, I suppose. And when I finished my master's, I went into King's College London just to sort of have a nose around, actually. Again, you couldn't do that with pass cards and security gates nowadays. But I was like, there might be some adventures to be had. Like, what's going on here? Like, it was that food of different subjects and different disciplines that interest me. And I found myself in the engineering department. And I saw a poster for something quite obscure and arty that I was going to on the door of this engineer's office. I was like, I'm going to that. I would not have expected to see that in this engineering department. I sort of had a look through the window. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got that book. Okay, knock, knock, knock. And I said, hi there, I'm Zoe, I'm an artist and do this project on this. I've always been interested in engineering and I wondered if you could recommend anything I could read or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, that turned out to be my now, lifelong buddy and professional other half, Mark Miodownik. And we basically hit it off in the sense of, oh, I'm interested in this. Oh, I'm interested in this. And we sort of got it and got each other. And I did my PhD with him, but it was a risk because it was saying there's something of the engineer, there's something of the rigor and the interest in how things work, and there's something of what we're doing here within engineering that seems to resonate. So, for example, when I started doing the PhD, I'd also help teach undergraduate engineers. Now, what will I have to teach them, having gone through an art college system? But actually, there's a lot about problem solving and how things are made that I could impart. And I remember I did the whole degree basically in a year. I just went to all the lectures of first, second, third years. I just gobbled it up because I was interested in it, because I'd done a lot of work with materials and about materials, but didn't have that language of them. Like, I remember there was a metallurgy lecture where they showed a cross-section of an object that had been cast. When they put it up, they said, how was this made? No one knew. And I was like, oh, it's been cast. And yeah, it's been cast. How do you know? And I said, well, because the outside's cooled quicker than the inside, and you can see in the cross-section that those bits are small and those bits are big. Like, and you realise experience of stuff, although when we were doing casting at art college, you didn't necessarily use the same words, but there's lots of experiences that come through the making of things that now I was building a vocabulary around, that suddenly meant it was unlocking potentially much more easily for me than it was for the people who'd done all the science A-levels, who'd done all the correct courses, but they hadn't really made things. And so also they didn't really understand the breaking of things, and like even how to use a hammer and like leverage, and like there was a lot they could do that I couldn't do so easily, but there was a lot I knew and had experienced that I was now able to bring to the table.
I love that. It's a different view. It's a different aspect and a different way of approaching the same problems. The problem's the same. The approach is slightly different. On your website, I mean, there's a little bit that I pulled off. It says, at the heart of my work is a desire to provide encounters with materials that strive to help us to look at the world through new lens and reveal the agency of matter.
Yeah.
Now, you've exemplified that, and again, I sort of dug in at little videos and I found out there's a Radio 4 thing that you did with the spoons, where you're looking at what should we be eating off in order to enhance the culinary experience, really.
Yeah.
And you managed to get some fairly serious Radio 4 presenters sucking spoons, which was great to watch. But that was all about the materials that the spoon is made of and what makes the food taste better. And that's sort of exemplified for me your approach, it looks like, is there is a material that's right for every single job. And what is that material and how do we explore that? Am I reading it right?
Yeah, but also the wrong material may be the more interesting choice. But knowing why it may be wrong or right or more or less interesting, how can you know that if you don't know your material in the first place? For example, so the Spoons project was actually the chapter in my PhD. So this is, within an engineering department, looking at material science and engineering, but realizing lots of the experiments and the way in which properties get explored are done with these samples that are somehow kind of ignored. So they'll have these little rods and sticks and shapes that fit in machines that can get pulled and stretched and things. And the sample is the shape it is because then it fits in the machine right. But these samples get factored out later in the equations. So you sort of divide by area. So you take away the shape of the thing to get to a sort of pure essence of what steel might be doing. You're looking for the abstract nature expressed in an equation about what something's like, but it sort of slightly denies the thing in a way that you feel has a resonance with those of us kind of on a human scale. We know it matters what shape something is and how it will behave. And like, we know that there's experiences of stuff that are actually difficult to describe as well. Like you could talk about shininess and we'd all be able to pick maybe amongst like 30 objects on the table, pick the shiniest. We'd sort of know what we mean, but there's not really like a shininess equation or index that is a quantified, measured, certified thing. It's an experiential thing, but it doesn't mean you couldn't break it down into lux levels, reflectivity. Like you could break it down scientifically, but it's not necessarily expressed scientifically. Coming back to the kind of performance studies angle on things, that's often about what people do, but things do things all the time, right? That's why they exist, because they're happy just to sit there having a relationship with itself and not melting onto the table. Whereas that other thing is a different thing, and that thing does melt on the table. Oh my God, what's the difference between that? Like they have an agency, and materials do things all the time in order to exist or not exist. Like the fact that it might evaporate is about what it's like. And I think understanding that there is material performance and there's an agency in stuff, but there's also an agency in things. And could I make things that were both a scientific experiment that did new science and was rigorous and allowed publishable results, but that also brought in this agency question? So, for example, I made a set of tuning forks that were all identical in size, different materials. And so the change in the experience of what they sounded like, or the vibration you felt in your hand as you whacked them, was directly attributable to that material change and the influencing factors of density and elastic modulus. So those were the sort of scientific things that affected how that material behaved. But it was the shape that made it ring, but it was also the shape that meant you understood when you come at it in the world, that, oh, that's the thing I pick up and I play, you then are able to explore and have a discussion around acoustics, around materials, around the science of, but why does the copper tuning fork sound different to the brass tuning fork? That's a material science and engineering question. But it's about the behavior of that material. It's about the performance of it, but it's also an object that engages you differently. And there's all these sensory aspects of materials that, again, sort of live around the fringes, like what does something sound like? What does something smell like, taste like, that aren't in that classic canon of rigorous scientific examination, but actually you could have a good stab at it. So the spoons was a project of taking that same methodology, keep the shape identical. This is a repeatable scientific experiment. Shape is identical, material changes. Can we conduct an experiment into what do these things taste like? And then working with psychologists and developing a formal scientific method to allow people to taste them blindfolded, so they're not prejudiced by, oh, it's gold, Can we take that perception data of people saying, oh yeah, that tastes however they might describe it, or if we give them a number of things to measure it against, how they rate it. And then can we map what people perceive? Well, actually, firstly, is there any agreement? If nobody agrees about the taste of anything being like what someone else says, then there's nothing really there. The first thing was, oh my goodness, look, there's a lot of people agreeing that this one is bitter. That agreement, can we map that against something quantifiable that you can measure? And we found you could map it against something called reduction potential, which is about how easy something loses or gains electrons. Essentially, it's like a measure of the reactivity of a surface. And we found that really correlated very strongly with bitter tastes. And that therefore, when you know that, then you could start to potentially, if you wanted to, engineer a material that was more of this scientific property, therefore to generate more of this sensation. And so you're starting to learn about properties of stuff, but through, again, experience-led, object-driven things, and it was a really great moment for me when those spoons, they were in a special exhibition at the Science Museum all about taste, and they're now in the permanent collection of the Design Museum. And so they live in these different sort of hallowed walls, but actually the point is that they should also be in the Food Museum, if there was such a thing. I don't know.
When the world opens up, I'm going to go find them. I'm definitely going to go find them, because it's a great story.
That project has seen me do things with chefs and work with restaurants and do a Radio 4 kitchen cabinet show, which is a real privilege to be part of. But it opens up one world, but it also sits in another world and has brought new methodologies to materials research. Like it's a sort of really good example of not looking at things just on one plane, but seeing how they cut into other places and other worlds that they are relevant to. And that why wouldn't you, if you're a chef who cares about the taste of the tomato, also care about the taste of the spoon or the fork, or maybe there's a particular smell of the plate that's affecting the tomato. Like, if you're interested, you're interested. So let's sort of spread that net wide.
And the words that were used, I think it was gold that came out as the best tasting.
Yeah.
I mean, the words that were used, it was mellow, it was soft,
yeah.
and I think there was a vanilla edge to it. Somebody said that there was a sort of...
It's almost like a sweetness, but you realise you start tasting yourself as well. Yeah, it's special.
What came in that for me is that, we choose materials because of how we can shape them, how we can form them. Cost comes into it, obviously, and everything else. But with every single thing that we buy and everything that we interact with, whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's a mug, a glass, whatever, there is a relationship with that thing that you pick up, that it's got a warmth, it's got a feel to it. And when we're working with students in schools, this is something we've got to be teaching them, is that you can't just make it out of that material because it's easy to make it out of that material, because you've got to think of the user journey and the user experience at the other end.
Those materials will tell a story and will generate an emotion and physical response in you, that some are more so than others. But you only have to see things like the faking of carbon fiber in plastics, like kind of, the application of a visual pattern to understand that what they're trying to do is tell you this is carbon fiber, therefore it's strong and it's resilient and it's high performance and it's loaded with meaning because it's become a signifier of a type of use from a type of industry and a type of world, that now when we put that pattern on a phone case, you'll pay an extra £3 for it or something. But we have a research project that was looking at prosthetics and the materials used in prosthetics. And there's some really great research, and this is to not knock it at all, like this is really important work that looks at high performance prosthetics. And Olympic athletes and the needing for it to be the best it could be and the lightest and the most high performance limb that it could be. But what they're not doing is designing to say, what's it like to sit on the sofa and hold that hand? You know, I want my loved one to hold the hand walking down the street. What's that like? Like, it might be able to throw a javelin, but it's a different thing. And designing for that emotional experience is as valid as it is to design for the gold medal. And just asking those questions of, not everybody who has a prosthetic is going in this athletic direction or wants to or is interested in that. It may be much, much more important that it is a thing they like, and what makes something you like.
There's got to be a comfort with it. There's got to be an affinity with it, hasn't there? I mean, 100 years ago, I was a car mechanic and bought really expensive spanners that I used regularly. They were ergonomically better. They fitted in my hand. I didn't know any of this back at the time. It was just like they were nice, expensive spanners. But they were also warm. And that was really important. When you picked them up, they actually fitted, but they were warm. I had cheap spanners. They were freezing cold constantly, and they were harder to use. They were just more difficult to use. And it's only now that you look back and I've still got them, and you look at both and you think, God, those ones are so cheap, nasty. They're not designed for the user. They're designed for sale, but not with the user in mind.
You're listening to Designed for Life. This podcast has been made possible through the support of our friends at the Edge Foundation, helping all young people to achieve their potential.
Let's move us on. Institute of Making. It's described as a club, which I really like. And the pictures of it, which I've seen, is like this huge workshop. And it's designed as like anybody from the university can pop in with anything that they've got. Is it really that open?
Yeah. I mean, you have to do our induction. And then once you've done the induction, your card works, so to speak, and you can beep and open the door and in you go. There's a few rules: no weapons, and don't be an arsehole.
In any walk of life, they're good rules.
Exactly. They're good lessons for life. But it is a very open, welcoming, inclusive space. So the Institute of Making as an entity is at UCL. And as things stand, we've got over 6,000 members, and we have people from across the entirety of the university. You know, you could be a professor of fine art in the Slade Art School. You could be an undergraduate engineer in mechanical engineering. You could be a cleaner who works 2 days a week. You could have an admin job in the library. You could be anything at the university, and you're allowed to be a member. We're not teaching a course. We're providing a space and an experience and a community, I suppose.
The problem you described earlier, where you had the triangulation and you were trying to work that out, could you walk in with that and there'd be somebody there to help you?
Yeah, it's really important, actually, that we're real physical stuff in a real physical space, but we're also people. And in fact, that's really the most important thing. The space is staff. So we have technicians on hand. We have an events manager. We have a materials library manager. Like, we have people who look after different aspects of what we do. We have a research manager who looks after our specific research projects. But the technicians, we sort of describe them as hosts in a way, because you're there to be the welcoming host at the party and make a connection and be curious and lead by example about how we want people to be in the space. And we know that you can't know everything anyway. So it's about knowing how to find stuff out. So people will come in, and 9 times out of 10, we can help them straight off the bat. But 10th thing out of 10, it's like, I don't know, let's go and find out together. So our technicians come from a variety of backgrounds and have different strings to their bows. But what unites them is a kind of curiosity.
What a cool job. You don't know what your day's going to bring, really. You go in there and let's just see what comes down. So you could have a math student coming in one day. You could have an art student coming in an hour later.
Totally.
I'm struck by the scale of some of the things that you're doing. I mean, I've picked 2 from the website. Compostable plastics, looking at how we make, market and recycle compostable plastics. And the growth of that obviously is something that people want. But it strikes me that's as big a systems problem as it is a material one. And it's huge. And these problems go over a number of years and are obviously funded by outside agencies.
Completely. And I think we don't shy away from saying this is a systems problem and it's a really big problem. And so part of it is to always have those multidisciplinary teams that involve behavioural scientists and economic experts, as well as a chemist and a materials engineer. Like, you can't really start talking about those problems unless you have a lot of different points of view around the table, because although you can do one thing that tackles one area, nothing of it exists in isolation. So it is ambitious, and we won't solve it, but it's as much about picking something we can do, but also making sure the conversation doesn't shy away from the scale of this as an issue. I mean, you see compostable written on things as almost like a marketing word now, that this is okay because it's compostable. But you realise, well, firstly, is it? Like, it's not organic that really in this country has an actual meaning that you have to have a badge for, and there's people who will come and test your farm and look at it and say, no, you haven't got organic status because X, Y, and Z and stuff. Like, it's not something that you can or can't claim by an external body. And then what do you really mean compostable? Under what conditions? For how long? Can I put that in the garden compost then? Or does that mean it's okay to go into landfill because then that will just rot down? Is that all right? Like, it's so unclear and so much lack of clarity, yet clearly it's a very powerful word at the moment of consumption, because it makes it feel quite natural and like a thing is okay because it will just be composted.
Most of us want to do the right thing. So if you see compostable on it, you think great, but it might be compostable in landfill in 10 years, maybe.
I mean, I'm in a documentary about landfill for the BBC where they sent me to a whole load of rubbish tips.
What a glamorous job you've got.
I can't tell you. I mean, that's the perfect example of, again, back to the coup, the project. For a month or two, you're in this extraordinary world that you'd have no other access to. Like, when else are you going to get to rummage through landfill sites and dig them up again? But we got permission from Birmingham City Council to dig up a landfill site that I think was grassed over and closed in like 1996 or something. And we located a section where they thought, yeah, that's probably going to be mid-80s rubbish. They let us at it with a JCB, and we're digging up a landfill site to see what you find. And I'm not joking, I was able to pick up a newspaper, open it up and read it as if it was printed yesterday. Like, it's in better condition than a newspaper that you'd have in your shed for 2 years, you know? Like, this was preserved. You'd think, oh yeah, compost, surely in a landfill site a newspaper would rot down. Well, you've got an atmosphere with no oxygen, no bugs are living, like, it's mummified and it's totally preserved. And it's sort of shocking. But on the other hand, I ended up thinking, well, it's a place to put it, isn't it? Until we need this stuff to actually deal with it in a more responsible way. We ended up mining it for metals. There's a lot of stuff down there. And when rare earths and precious metals become even rarer and more precious, there's a resource. But it's just an interesting way of looking at waste, because it's not a waste unless you waste it. It's a waste to burn something, from my point of view, because then it's gone. It's absolutely gone. That's a true grieving waste. It's the end of it. The minute that sort of Bic biro is lying drained and empty on the landfill site, it is sad. It's not yet a waste. It is still there.
The other one that I picked on there was Ever After, and this really intrigues me. I mean, I staged on TV. I think that's the best thing that's come out in lockdown. David Tennant, Michael Sheen, just chatting, really, and inviting mates in to have a chat with them. But also Birdsong was done specifically for lockdown, and that was amazing. And you've got this Ever After, which is looking at the evolution of live theatre post-COVID.
Yeah.
So there's no limits to where you're going to go with this work.
The Ever After project, again, you might think, why is that interesting to the Institute of Making? Well, we are a performance space. One way of looking at our space is we are a performance space, because we are a site of action and engagement and encounter. The materials library is like a materials theatre. We perform all sorts of action in there, as well as then really formally stage an event for 5,000 people that we'll call the Slime Olympics, and it have these bonkers, like, we put stuff on, and there's a liveness that runs, as I said, it's from that way of thinking about things, and that type of practice is really part of where I come from. It always runs in the background. But actually, that is of interest to us. Like, how do you have people in a space sharing tools? You touch that, I touch that. It's the same question if you're in a more classical theatre environment, when you deal with props and presents and like all of that language, all of those things are common. But it's also a sense in which the materiality of things has never been sort of more present than in this COVID life. Like, we're thinking about solids and liquids and gases. Heaven forbid you breathe in someone else's gas, you know. The states of matter and their presence, we're alert to in a very different way. In the theatrical environment, again, people have always been aware of those things, but this has a whole new layer of meaning, that we are here in this shared space, in a shared moment in time, breathing the same air. And you can look at that being on one end of the spectrum, like sports, people in a shared space in a shared period of time doing a set activity. Or you might look at a play, or you might look at a piece of experimental theatre that previously has been staged in supermarkets, and now like the supermarket has got a whole new layer of meaning on it. Or you might look at how we handle and build things and whether those things need to change in order to make them more COVID secure and COVID safe. There's just a huge amount of common ground and interest that comes around thinking about materials, performance, and people.
I was going to say, it all comes back to people's interaction with things and circumstance around them. Just going on to that then, the last podcast that I did was with Professor Becky Early, who was biotextile. She could have talked for weeks on that. And she was just infused by some of the textiles that she was seeing now, which she thought was the future. That's where we're going to go. Or maybe not. But at the moment, that's what's drawing me in. What's got you at the moment? What materials are you thinking, well, that's where we're going. That's the future.
I find it difficult to think that's the future because it's a bit like why I find things like smart materials mildly irritating. It's like all materials are smart. You're just not asking the right question. Do you know what I mean? What do you mean butter's not amazing and futuristic? Butter's the most futuristic material there is. Like, I could sort of argue all sorts of ways of looking at. I mean, I'm saying butter because over the weekend I made some butter, never made it before, and it was utterly transformative and staggering. I knew the theory of it, and then I made it, and it was even better for knowing the theory, even more delightful. And I've done it a few ways now. That the simplest would be get some cream, put it in a jam jar, put the lid on, and shake it for dear life, and keep shaking it. Or you can get an electric whisk, cream, whip it to whipped cream, keep going. It will go like scrambled eggs. Keep going again. Suddenly, you've got on your whisk butter, and in the bowl, sort of like buttermilk, watery stuff in the bottom of the bowl. You're like, oh my God, I've made butter. And then have some butter. Like, it's so ancient in the sense of it's one of those food practices that has gone in many directions in different cultures and have different traditions in different places. But at the same time, have we seen the future of butter? I don't know. Like, what could be next for butter? Is butter a metaphor for the transformation of waste? Who knows?
I've been playing with bread. I mean, we've all got a little bit more time on our hands, haven't we? And I've been messing around with bread, and my daughter's been doing it with me. And I'm just amazed at how many different types of bread there are. I mean, I come from an Irish background, so soda bread I was brought up on. And like everybody in the house loves soda bread now. It's like, that's fantastic. And it's so easy to make and no yeast.
I absolutely implore you, hit the next level of lockdown mania and make your own butter to go with your homemade bread.
That's on my list. We'll make the bread and the butter to go with it, and that's it. I'm sorted. So gonna move us on to the next bit. I mean, we touched on it right at the beginning. I said that the thing that I hear over and over is students want to make things. They want to roll their sleeves up and they want to get involved. And actually, there's this myth that lower ability students, that's all they want to do. They don't want to engage with bits of paper, and they don't want to design things. And actually, I'm not sure I buy into that. But your passion, and it is a passion, of materials, how would you encourage teachers to share that passion of materials with their students?
I think it does come back to getting your sleeves rolled up and engaging with the material. And, I will go and do a guest examination or something at an art college, and there's always someone who's done some design work, but really what they've just done is done some rendering for ages of this lamp or something. And I said, well, have you made one? No. How are you going to make it? Oh, I'll 3D print it. It's like, that's not making it and engaging with it as a design process. Like, if within 20 minutes of having the idea from it, you knocked one up out of cardboard, and then another one and another one and another one, within a day you'd have got further than you have with your 4 weeks of rendering a wood effect on that virtually. You may then realise it's not a lamp anyway, it's this, and I definitely want to do it in wood. That's my next, you just will make different decisions, I suppose. But I think the best way to engage students with materials, and it's hard because I guess it's messy and it's noisy and it's dangerous, or it's lots of things.
Oh, we're used to all those things. Yeah. Design and technology teachers, that's our world.
Exactly. But I think even like saying, okay, we're going to make butter. What do you mean we're going to make butter? And then once we've got the butter, we're going to process the butter. How do you mean we're going to process it? Well, you've got to shape it. How are you going to shape it when it's all squidgy? Maybe you've got to put it in a bag. Like, you've got something very, very simple that you've got to problem solve with and ask questions of. And like say, how would you make a butter worm? Well, you might put it in a bag, cut the end of and extrude it out. Okay, I'm extruding. What else can you extrude in materials? Well, you sort of have a kind of plastics analogy conversation, but you're taking something and very quickly doing with it, I think.
Lots of departments are doing this already, but we're trying to encourage every classroom to have a prototyping corner where it's full of tact, basically. You know, anything that's left over gets put into this corner. And students are encouraged to, you know, as soon as they start a design, they might want to get up and just try and shape it, just try and form it out of bits of tape and bits of cardboard and just get a feel for size, shape and everything else. And that's so natural, and yet it was just a few years ago quite alien in the classroom. You know, you keep all the kids sitting in one place and then you let them all do, and you can't. In a workshop, you've just got to let them get up when they need to, really. It's
that sense in which you will have a different idea when you're doing it than you did if you were trying to draw it, for example, and not even starting with drawing it. We did some great shoe workshops with the Institute of Making where we got people making over Zoom. I'll show you. This is not good for those listening, but you looking at me down the Zoom call.
Yeah, it's paper, it's coloured paper and tape.
The idea was we didn't want people buying anything new. So it's all, you had to come with packaging that was going in the bin. And we built up prototypes of shoes and showed how you would construct it based actually on what would have been more traditional cobbling techniques in some respects. Like you can use that language and explain how a shoe might be built. And you're doing here the heel cup. Like, what's a heel cup? Well, this is it. And it's this sort of shape. But you're having that conversation while people are going at it with scissors. And, you know, you're constructing this shoe prototype. You know, this was an old workshop face mask that I brought home in early days of COVID thinking, shit, we might need masks around. And then it had a strap up high that went around the top of the head and one elastic that went lower down. Well, that's given me 2 laces on the shoe. I wouldn't have drawn double bowed laces on a shoe, but it's turned out quite well in the making. And then you'd have a made thing that was a sketch. You've made a sketch, but then you might draw from it and extract ideas by drawing from observation from a thing you've made. And then take that thing you've drawn and then try and make something else and sort of let one medium of thinking influence another medium of thinking.
It helps to overcome as well the design fixation that the students get stuck on sometimes. Is I've got one idea in my head and I'm going to go with that one. And once you start modelling something up, that idea suddenly becomes another idea, which becomes another idea, and then it moves from there. So I think it frees stuff up.
I would say give it a go of not even starting with drawing, because I think for the design fixator, it begins there. It begins with them drawing it, thinking, well, now I've got to make my drawing.
And it's got to be right, and it's got to be pretty, and it's got to be the right shape. And also, I mean, we've all been with kids that have got this idea in their head, but they just can't draw it, and there's a frustration in that. And so go and make it instead. That's cool. The more guests I talk to on this podcast, the more animated I become about the place of our subject and design and technology. You know, it is marginalised, and I spent the whole morning looking at the white paper that the government released yesterday for higher education and where we're going to go. And it sort of assumes, the white paper, and I'm still formulating this, but it assumes that everyone has a basic education which is knowledge-based and has very little creativity up to the age of 16. And then one group are going to go academic and they're going to go to university. So therefore they need A-levels and they're going to go this way. And then we're going to get another group who perhaps are slightly lesser ability, which is coming out in the reading that I'm doing this morning, who are going to go along a technical vocational route and are going to end up doing an apprenticeship or whatever. And I think the flaw in that thinking, first of all, is that you're a great example of this. You're fluid. We're all fluid and we find our own paths. But also this idea that everyone's going to have this common ground up to 16, that academia to 16 is all we need, and then everything else will flow from there. What is the role of creativity for you in pre-16 education? Let's just take it to that.
It's huge, because that's the thing that enables you to make the connections between things. It's when things become more and more connected that you understand more and more. Like, it's at the core of understanding, I think. It's not lightweight either. Like, it's really serious. It's really serious because it's at the core of humans, really. You're sat on your own twiddling your thumbs. Well, you pick up a stick. Then what are you going to do with that stick? And it's like the thing that enables us to invent stuff and come up with ideas, and be that bridges or poems. It's still what do you do when you're sort of like starting to twiddle your thumbs and you want to engage with the world? How are you doing that? Well, you're employing your creativity. You're coming up with an idea to impose an action into the world and make your mark. And I think having the confidence to go about creative processes, and therefore the confidence to fail, to get them wrong, to realise it's not going to be right first time, those are the things that you're going to be nurturing by embedding it at an early age, because then you're going to be saying, no matter what you're doing, there's a creative, there's a playful, there's a moment of brainstorming everything you can think about it. Now, what if this scenario, that, what have you ever thought about being like that? Oh, you want to build a track and trace system, right? What could it actually be? How might it work? Let's look at it this way. What could go wrong? Might this be a good idea? Well, let's try that, then let's model that. It's the ability to take whatever it is you're presented with and look at it from all points of view and all sides.
And not just from your perspective, but from other people's perspectives as well, which is just as important.
And if the problem could be, how can you tell if something is acidic or not? Or what can you do with these 3 chords on the guitar? Like, you're presenting a problem, you're asking someone to be creative with it. And in fact, the problem with some other ways of teaching certain subjects might be, and this is the only way to go about doing it. Now, while sometimes in life there is only a certain way.
But not often.
No, and also realising that maybe the best way to know that there is only that way, or there is a best way, is by trying a few other ways and realising why they're not as good.
And that's a recurring theme as well with the podcast, is this idea of, we have to let students go down blind alleys and do stuff that fails, because it's not failure, it's learning. And you learn more through getting something wrong than you do through getting something right sometimes.
It's a misnomer, isn't it, to think of somehow you need to acquire this knowledge that you're then going to lay over things and that suddenly you'll be able to do them. Let's think of the classic subject that you really do need to learn some things for, like medicine. Like, you are going to have some exams that ask you things where you've got to answer them within this small parameter of what is the answer. But when it comes to practicing medicine, it's a practice, right? They say that, don't you? Oh, I'm not a practicing doctor anymore, sort of thing. Like, it's a practice, which means it's a process that you go through and that you have to be able to apply and think to yourself, what is wrong with this person? Let's try this. And it's not that I need to keep reading the research papers to acquire more knowledge. I need to understand people and behavior. Like, it's not an exam when it comes to the thing. It's a practice, and it's a type of approach to problem solving.
I think for me, when I read everything this morning, we've got basically a 1920s curriculum offer that we are trying to equip kids for a very complex world where tech is moving so fast, everything is moving so fast, and we're still trying to stick with a very dated system. So finally, what advice would you give students? Because the beauty of the podcast now, which I absolutely love, and it makes it all worthwhile, is there's more and more students listening to the pods, which is great. So if there's a student listening now that's thinking, just look at Zoe's path, look at where she's got to, how she's got to. She didn't sit down at 13 and map it all out on a bit of paper. It's happened. And I love the fact that you went in for your A-levels and came home with 3 different subjects. I love that, because I've seen that happen, and I've students worry about it and parents worry about it, because there's probably 3 or 4 months of planning gone into what A-levels you're going to do, and then you come home that day. Your parents must be very liberal to go with that and trust you. So if there's a student listening now that's thinking, I want to explore this, but I'm not sure where I want to go, what advice would you give them?
First is not to worry if you don't know what to do, because I guarantee that's going to be a much better journey than for those who do know what they want to do. My advice would be to develop your antennae, develop the little feelers that just tingle for certain things. And you're like, I like the taste of this. I'm talking about not eating taste, but like, I like this vibe. I like that idea. Yes. Notice that in yourself. Notice when you kind of into something a bit, and then allow yourself to do it and go into it. Like, what you might notice is that you're like, oh my God, I've just lost 2 hours watching people do weird things with eggs on YouTube. And I can't stop watching people doing things with eggs on YouTube. Well, I'd say the next thing is get some eggs and have a go at something with that eggs. Like, notice that you're kind of into it, and then engage with it in a different way that involves your agency, your doing, and see what that's like, and see if you're still into it, and like notice what it was like, and like just notice when you're kind of going, oh, I really enjoyed that documentary. I want to know more about that life or something, or just notice those things in yourself and you'll go down interesting paths. And then also couple with that a sense in which if an opportunity presents itself, say yes. That would be kind of my advice.
And then commit.
Yeah. And don't think to yourself, what's it not? Just think about what it is and really go for it. And like when you're in that situation, make yourself useful and be nice and be someone who people will like to have around. Because as I said, when we're hiring technicians, when I'm looking at CVs and when I'm interviewing, I'm not really interested in the skills or the qualifications as a kind of like mark of their excellence. I'm thinking, do you want to spend all day with this person? Do you know what I mean? How are they present in a room? Are they going to be positive and engaging?
The skills are almost a give me, aren't they? I mean, it was the same when I used to interview for teachers. Every teacher would have the qualifications there. What you were looking for at interview was that little touch of something that would be magic in the classroom.
Yeah. And again, you don't know necessarily how to cultivate that. The way to do that is go back to your antennae. Go back to what are the things that you like. And when you talk about the things you like, you're going to be someone people and you'll find your crowd because there'll be other people who want to talk about that thing too. And there'll be people who don't want to hear about that. That's all right. They'll find other people. You know what I mean? Like,
find your clan and follow your nose.
It's easy to spot some things. That clan's easy to join. But there are all sorts of things. And the scale in which your ambitions are, like just be there present with what you've got and do something with that and it will grow.
Zoe, thank you so much for the time. I've loved the conversation. I've made about 4 pages of notes and I am going to go away and make butter to go with my bread. That is something I'm definitely going to do.
It's a joy, utter joy. And thank you for having me. This has also been a joy.
I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. What a guest. Zoe was such a joy to talk to, and the passion that comes out there for what she does and the curiosity and the fact that she hasn't got a plan. There is no plan there. The plan is, I want to play with this. I want to find out where it takes me and I want to find out what I can do with it. And I think we can all learn from that. I know I am. I know I'm learning from that. I'm learning from all these podcasts and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to do them. So if you did enjoy that, please, I keep pleading for people to do this. Please, wherever you got your podcast from, just give us a review. That opens it up to a wider audience. It allows more teachers, more people from industry to find us and to share the podcast and to share thoughts from it. If you've got any thoughts that spin off from that you want to share with us, Designed for Life at data.org.uk, please give us some feedback. And if you can't leave us a review, send us some feedback there via the email. That would be a great thing to do. Thanks to Zoe. Thank you again to everyone from the Edge Foundation for making this possible. And when the world does allow us to congregate in a room, we'll put Zoe on and we'll get her in front of you and you can share that passion, share that enthusiasm for design and for just finding out about stuff. So until the next time, thank you so much for tuning in and take care, and we'll be back with you soon.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you did, hit the subscribe button now, as we have guests lined up for future pods that will inform, inspire, and entertain. This podcast is brought to you by the Design and Technology Association.